So just let me explain a little bit to you about what's going on here at Fellowship Bible Chapel today, because we're a little bit late. We were going to have a business meeting after my update, but on the way to church this morning, we hit a chuck hole or a pothole and blew a tire on my car. I was able to get to a gas station. We called the tow truck. Pam stayed with the tow truck. Somebody from church came and picked me up. She got the car down. So we decided to flip the business meeting and the church, the prophecy update, because, the joke was, I said, I asked them, how long is the business meeting going to last? And they said an hour. And I'm like, an hour? I'm like, who do you think you are, John Howler? And they go, no, because we don't go over an hour. So they didn't go over an hour. They went over an hour and a half. But who's counting, right? So it's not that easy to get it in, is it, folks? So that's what's been going on. That's why this is still late today. And let me just address one issue that came up a couple weeks ago, and I forgot to mention something about it this Sunday. There was an accusation running around Facebook that I and some people who we have speak here on occasion are Hebrew roots, and I objected to that characterization. And people who worship in Messianic congregations, who decide in their own Christian life to keep parts of or all of the Torah or celebrate the feast of the Lord, objected to my characterization of what I said about Hebrew roots. So let me just clarify. The accusation of Hebrew roots was that I believed, and people who speak here on occasion believe, that you have to keep the law in order to be saved. That is not correct. No one could have listened to me or the other person ever and believed that that is even marginally true. Now, if people choose to keep the feast, celebrate the feast of the Lord, I'm fine with that. If they want to study the Torah, I'm fine with that. In fact, I have advocated here that we do have Hebrew roots to our faith, and there is a Jewish way of looking at the scriptures that I think the church needs to recover, because it will open up, it will make the scriptures deeper. So that's what I advocate, but this keeping the law in order to be saved, which was the context of the accusation against me, that's a falsehood. And the people that are saying it are doing it based on ignorance. They don't know what they're talking about. And frankly, they need to stop doing that, because it's just not accurate. So, and that, by the way, when I hear some people sometimes say, the feasts are just for Israel. I don't agree with that. They're the feasts of the Lord. They were given to the believing community to instruct us about aspects of the ministry of the Messiah. And we know that several of those feasts have been fulfilled in the first coming of Jesus, and we know that the fall feasts are yet to be fulfilled in the second coming of Jesus. And they all tell us something about Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. So when I hear people say, oh, those are just for Israel or just for the Jews, I worship a Jewish Messiah, a Jewish Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So anything that instructs me about Jesus, I'm on board with. I figure that's for me to learn about. So I hope that clears everything up. So, and my objection to the Jewish roots thing was not to castigate the people who worship in Messianic communities. That was not my intent. My intent was to address the context of the false, completely, totally false accusations being made against me about Hebrew roots. And again, I think we need to look more at things. So today, we're going to talk about truth wars. Again, it was another week where there were a lot of different things that were happening. And sometimes I think that sometimes I get to Friday and I'm wondering, like, what am I going to talk about? And that's not trouble. So let's just start with a verse today. Some verses. Now, we know in Matthew chapter 24 that Jesus talks about the fact that the characteristic of this period of time as we approach the coming of the Lord will be characterized, they'll be like birth pangs of a woman. They will get closer and closer together. They'll get more intense. But one of the characteristics of that time, in fact, the one that Jesus warned about the most, was deception. Take heed that no man deceive you. And so it becomes very difficult to determine now, I think in our culture, is what is the truth? What is real? And I'll talk a little bit about that today. But 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul writing as he approached the end of his life, he knew that his execution was drawing near. And so the thing that he wrote that was important to him, he was writing to Timothy, and he said, Timothy, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. This is speaking about people in the church. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. But watch thou on all things, endure afflictions, do the work of evangelists, make full proof of thy ministry. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul warned about the fact that in the last days, perilous times will come, and then goes into a long list to describe the characteristics of the people that would be existing in those last times. I don't think there's any question that we're living in those times, as it's more and more and increasingly more difficult to find out exactly what the truth is. Part of it relates to, for example, here's this investigation about Trump. The Russian collusion thing seems to have fallen apart. Mueller is supposed to give his report sometime in the next couple of weeks. There's question now as to whether it's ever going to be made public, whether we'll even see a summary of it. But now what's happened is the Democrats in Congress and the House of Representatives are shifting the investigation. So now instead of looking at Russian collusion, we're going to look at Trump's finances, because we're really going to get him on the finances. And so this is where, some editorials this week, Trump's red line, this is from the Washington Post on the left, Trump's red line turns blue, and then Kimberly Strassel's great article Friday in the Wall Street Journal, shifting, reference to Adam Schiff, the head of the House investigation committee that's going to do the investigation, shifts to phase 2 of collusion. So now they're going to prove that there was something else going on. So what have we been, 2 years into this now, or over 2 years into this, and there's been people charged with process crimes, but never anything related to the specifics of the campaign that really were the basis of this. And then you see this former FBI director, acting director McCabe, running around telling a different story almost every time he's interviewed. And people put him up as, sort of like a paragon of the truth. And it's like, he's so inconsistent in what he says. I don't know why anybody would believe anything that he says. He was fired for lying. And now he's saying, well, I'm going to sue because, that's false. I'm not lying. Well, there's like 4 interviews this week where you told something different every time. So I don't know what you can believe. And this was the example. This is the Empire actor Jesse Smollett in Chicago, who claimed that he was attacked by some people, and they said this is MAGA country. The whole thing, I never really talked about it that much initially because the whole thing didn't really make any sense. There were a lot of inconsistencies. The police came out this week. He was charged with filing a false police report. Even down under in Australia, they've written about it. Reject facts and liars rule is the article, the blog, or the editorial opinion written by Andrew Bolt at the Herald Sun in Australia. You might want to look up that article. It's also interesting, on the same page, there's this Turn Left for Hatred of Israel article. But the Smollett thing led, of course, to a lot of people, initially Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, both running for Democratic nomination for president, had said, oh, this is an example of a modern-day lynching. The police have kind of come out in kind of an unusual way, I think, debunk that initially as part of their announcement of the charges that were being filed. Smollett still maintains that he's innocent, that he's really the victim here. Somebody reported that it's good that He's sleeping better now, though, Mr. Smollett's, because he can rest better knowing that the person responsible for his attack has been arrested. Think about that a little bit. This was a lady named Mumford writing in the Washington Post when it sort of started breaking that Smollett's was going to be charged, that what he had said was not true. And this is what she wrote. And that reason, more than any other, is why I need this story to be true. And I saw a lot of people on CNN and elsewhere saying, yes, we need this story to be true. Why do you want a story of a racist attack to be true? What kind of sick, twisted mind do you have? Is why I need this story to be true, Mumford said, despite its ugliness and despite what it would say about the danger of the world I live in. The damage done would be too deep and long-lasting. Well, Kamala Harris, who had tweeted that it was a modern-day lynching, was confronted about that by, and I think this is one of the classic interviews that I've seen, about 45-second clip, Kamala Harris being asked about, hey, what do you think of your tweet now? Watch this.
Which tweet? Which tweet? What tweet?
About saying that it is a modern day lynching. That
sorry.
Yes, Jussie Smollett.
Okay, so I will say this about that case. I think that the facts are still unfolding, and I'm very concerned.
Okay, so, and that's PragerU did a little video on it, so thank goodness for PragerU. By the way, PragerU, if you've never checked it out on YouTube, they have great 4 to 5 minute videos. Their theme is, give us 5 minutes, we'll give you a semester of truth that you won't get in college. They're very well done. They're very well produced. They're approaching or may have now surpassed 1 billion views. They're the most watched YouTube channel anywhere on any topic, which is great. Now, somebody on the left, I saw we are exposing Prager University. And why is that? Because they went to a strip center in Glendale, California. It's one of those mailbox places. And this is where PragerU has a mailbox. And it's not really a real university. It's like everybody in the world that's a thinking human being that's alive enough to fog up a mirror would know that Prager University is not a real university. They're trying to replace what the real universities are. But you see these narratives that come out. So every time something happens now where like Kamala Harris is caught, I mean, it looked like she was looking around like, who let this lady in here? Where's my staff? Where are my handlers? And where's my talking points to answer the obvious question that somebody's going to ask? So now these things come out. And it's so when somebody's caught doing something like AOC and Ed Markley was caught with the way they released this new Green Deal, it's not so much that they're caught and they can't explain what they really said or why what they said is true. It's the Republicans hope to sway voters with labels that demonize Democrats. Like, you're a liar, which is true. And I know he hasn't been tried yet, so Mr. Smalls may be proven in a court of law to be a liar. Here's an interesting thing that somebody sent me this morning from the Daily Mail, a report, a study out. 92% of left-wing activists live with their parents, and 1 in 3 is unemployed. Study of Berlin protesters. Fine. So they looked at these Berlin protesters and they found out that 92% of them are still living in mommy's basement, probably eating Cheetos and other things that aren't necessarily good for them. But there's an attack. Look, we need to be prepared for persecution that's coming. Here's an article on the right-hand side from the newspaper in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And you see here, Hagedorn once linked gay rights ruling to bestiality. So the issue is there's a gentleman running, Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate running. He used to be legal counsel to Scott Walker. And he had blogged about his feeling about same-sex marriage and the Supreme Court decision that overturned a long-time law, like all of human history law, about overturning sodomy laws. And he objected to it. And he said, if we can't make a moral judgment here, how do we make a moral judgment on bestiality? He wasn't saying that sodomy and bestiality are the same thing. He was just saying is, if we can't have this law, how can we have this law? It's the same thing on same-sex marriage. Once you break it away from male-female, one male, one man, one woman, what's this? How do you argue against polygamy? Or one man, two women, or two men, one woman, or one transgender and of the 59 different varieties of transgender that I guess exist. How do you argue the morality of that or put a law in place? That's the question that's asked. But so now he's being taken. So Think Progress comes out and they've attacked this guy. And he says, look, I'm Catholic, I'm religious, I have these beliefs, but I'm not going to let it affect cases that come before me. But what the left does is they say, listen, you can't be unbiased. You have an opinion on certain things. So therefore you can't be unbiased on anything. Now, if you turn that to them, it's the same thing with them. How can you be unbiased? But, that requires sort of rational thought, which really isn't a characteristic of people on the left. So, and the Federalist comes out and says, look, this is bad. You can't be a good judge because you're a Christian. And you see Kamala Harris doing it. You see Cory Booker doing it. You see these questioning of judicial candidates that are put up that might be devout Catholics. And what was it that Dianne Feinstein said last year when one of the people came up for their nomination hearing in the Senate? The dogma lives strongly within you. Dianne Feinstein talking about somebody being too dogmatic. Really. Pot kettle Dianne. Although she did a good job with those 12-year-olds this week. I have to give her credit for that. I don't know if you saw the video, that bunch of 12-year-olds came and said, well, are you going to support the new Green Deal? And she's like, you're 12 years old. You don't know anything. Come back to me when you can be a voter. You didn't elect me. And so all these people, they're pushing their kids out there. I don't know. I mean, when you were 12, were you concerned about, I was concerned about how to hit a curveball, or, if my Sporting News subscription was going to run out or something like that. And so we're creating these, and these kids, I guarantee you, they're going to be living in mommy's basement for a long time. Well, the College Fix came out with their top 10 or top 12. There's a long, I think it was College Fix, came out with these. These are courses being offered around at major universities in the United States. They have like the Big Ten division, and they have the the Southeast Conference division. So here's just a few of some of the ones that, these are courses that you can now take in college, that you can, depending on the college. By the way, I talked to some friends recently. Their kids go to Ivy League schools or very well-known Midwest Big Ten universities. One of my colleagues told me his son is going to business school, and for a 2-year program, the cost will be $200,000 to get an MBA. And that the cost of his other children who've gone there undergrad, and I think he has 4 or 5 kids that have gone through this university, has been, it's now $80,000 a year. $80,000 a year. That's a lot of money. So here's what you can get. This is University of Illinois, Gender and Gaming. Examines the history of gender in video games, focusing on how movements like Gamergate, Race Failed 09, internet bullying, doxing, and trolling emerged as a coordinated effort to consolidate and maintain video games and geek culture as a domain of masculinity and whiteness. By the way, do you know up the road at Ashland University, there's a game, it's a very popular sort of communitarian game. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. They actually offer a scholarship at Ashland University to people who will come and play this game on the university's team for that particular internet game. Ashland University. Look it up, Ashland University Scholarship Gaming, and it will tell you. And it's not basketball anymore, it's now. So I guess Ashland University is promoting bullying and whiteness, masculinity and whiteness, I guess. I guess that's what they would say. Swarthmore College, I may have mentioned this previously. Religion 032, class, Queering God, Feminists and Queer Theology. The God of the Bible and later Jewish and Christian literature is distinctively masculine, definitely male. Or is he? If we can point out places in traditional writings where God is nurturing, forgiving, and loving, does that mean that God is feminine or female? This course examines feminist and queer writings about God, explores the tensions between feminist and queer theology, and seeks to stretch the limits of gendering and sexing the divine. Key themes include gender, embodiment, masculinity, liberation, sexuality, feminist, and queer theory. And the LGBTQ community, by the way, is breaking apart. Martina Navratilova, who identifies as a lesbian, great tennis star, great tennis player, she has said it's not fair for males who claim they're female to be participating against other females. It's not right. The Olympics has now come out with rules that will allow males to participate in female competition at the Olympics. And Martina Navratilova has come out and said, this is not right. It's not fair. She recognizes that there's a difference. It's pretty easy to do. And so the transgender community is all over her now. She's being castigated in tweet storms and all this other thing because she says it's not fair to do that. Pomona College, California, Queering Childhood. This interdisciplinary course examines the figure of the child and how this figuration is used by politics, law, and medicine to justify continued cultural investment in reproductive heteronormativity and productive able-bodiedness. In doing so, we examine the queer and crip children and childhoods against the figure of the child, against which the figure of the child is articulated. This course draws on work in gender studies. Itself is probably a fraud. Anyway, it's just, and one more. Middlebury, well, I got two more. Middlebury College. In this course, we explore the place of misogyny in U.S. media, American misogyny. Early topic will include film noir, Cold War, gender, scapegoating, and lesbian pulp fiction. This is what you get at Middlebury. That's a pretty expensive college in Vermont. And here's Northwestern. This is the school I was talking about, $80,000 a year. Beyond the binary, transgender and race. Exploration of transgender history, identity, and expression with a focus on the intersection of gender and race. Unsettling whiteness. So this is what you get for your $80,000 a year at Northwestern. Have at it. Look, there's a reason behind all of this. This is a report. This report first came out 10 years ago. The report is called International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, an Evidence-Informed Approach. Now, I don't think it's evidence-based. I don't even think it's evidence-informed. This is a political agenda that they're trying to drive here. This is put out by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, the one that says that the Jews don't really have any connection to Hebron or Jerusalem and that type of thing. But they'll push all of this sexuality education and guidelines for that all over the world, this is what they're pushing, and it's part of their sustainable development goals for education. All the stuff on the environment, they have education. And so here are some of the things, key concepts, understanding gender. And it goes through, and they have, what are you going to teach kids when they're 5 to 8? What are you going to teach them when they're 9 to 12? What are you going to teach them in middle school? What are you going to teach them in high school? And what should they be learning, and what should the goals be? And it goes into a number of different concepts, I think 6 or 7 different concepts. And then they have outlines of what you're supposed to do and what the goals are going to be. And this is being adopted by school districts all over the place. And this is part of an agenda to, I don't know how else to describe it, but to dumb down the world and culture to accept a one world government. I don't know any other rationale that could be behind all of this. In fact, this lady tweeted, I don't know this person, somebody posted this, I thought it was great, and she said this, transgenderism, she quoted someone who had written about cults, Parallax Optics, and the quote in this blog post was, transgenderism is an experiment to test how far reality can be hijacked. If you can make people agree that men are women, you can make them agree to anything. And what's the famous saying is, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe anything. And it's true. And this is all part of a deception agenda that exists in the world. There's no doubt about it. It even goes to the law. I've mentioned this in the past. This comes from our friends up in Canada. And sometimes, look, I know that there's people around the world that listen. I focus on the U.S. because that's where I live. But I think what's going on in the U.S. is indicative of what's going on or what has already happened in many other places, such as Europe. Europe is effectively gone. And so here are some things that are being done in Ontario. Orwellian lessons for lawyers. This was an editorial in the Toronto Sun a week or so ago. Progressive agenda being forced on all Ontario lawyers. And there are other things that were done by the ABA, model standards on code of professional responsibility here in the United States a year ago. Those haven't been adopted everywhere, but essentially it's like you can't say anything that could be, you can't have an opinion that would be considered discriminatory. So if I stand up here and I say, I believe that God created male and female, and that if you need to understand your gender, look in your pants, that would be considered discriminatory, insulting, bigotry, transphobia, whatever. And if these rules are put in place, I could lose my license to practice law. Now, I'm an old man, so it's not an older man. I'm an old man. Parts of me are pretty new, though. I've had some replacement parts done, so I don't know if that brings the average down or not. But so it, some of this stuff doesn't really affect me. But it's like, I've got great nieces and nephews and nieces and that type of thing. What kind of world are they going to grow up in? What's going to happen to them? And this is already happening to Christians. Christians are being silent because they don't want to lose their job. And that's the first step, and this is the goal. A lady in Portland, Oregon, she has a podcast that she does with another lady, and they talk about things like, and they're not really conservatives. Her husband and she own some coffee shops in Portland. She got on the podcast recently, and if you do get to the podcast, they do use some pretty salty language when they're talking. So their language is not clean, but they were talking about, we have questions about the Me Too movement, and has it gone too far, and some of these other things. And so what happened was, the coffee shops have now been attacked by the left in Portland, and they're on the verge of going out of business. For example, activists, probably calling from mommy's basement or using mommy's internet, contacted the suppliers of the coffee shop and said, you shouldn't do business with them because they support rape culture. That's what they said. It's not even true. And so now we have this, everything driving this outrage. And so now the issue becomes, this is why I think Jussie Smollett, look, he's on a TV show. I've never seen it, but people watch it. He makes $1 million a year. He's successful. He's popular. People like him. But that wasn't good enough. Why? Because he wasn't a victim. So victimhood, being a victim is more important than being competent or good at what you do. And so the whole culture has been flipped upside down. So now let's talk about Middle East politics, and this is what we'll finish up with this week. U.S. ally, the Kurdish forces have requested, look, Mr. Trump, would you please not withdraw all your troops? We're trying to work out a deal with the Assad government. Turkey has said they treat all of us like we're all terrorists, even though we're not all terrorists, and we did fight against ISIS. So would you please not withdraw right away? So the Trump, I think with the influence of John Bolton, came back and said, okay, we're going to leave 200 to 400 troops in Syria rather than withdraw everything. That was just announced a couple days ago. At the same time, this is going on there, and this is kind of a shift. So you see up here at the top, House opens inquiry into U.S. nuclear power venture in Saudi Arabia. So whether that's good policy or not, it's now being investigated. So there's going to be the Saudi investigation, there's going to be this investigation, that and it's just going to be one investigation after another until the next election. The other thing that's happening while all this is going on is what I see as a push to unite the Islamic world. This was a conference that took place back originally in 2017, but also just recently in November in Istanbul, the Islamic Economy and Common Economic Systems. Declaration of the Second International Congress of the Islamic Union of Assam. And there were a lot of things discussed at this conference and other related conferences, and they all seem to be circling around or centered around Erdogan in Turkey. Erdogan, I think, has a desire to recreate the Ottoman Empire. That's why he's trying to get this 20-mile wide buffer safe zone, he calls it, in northern Syria that he would control. Because he said this. There was foreign policy articles, there were other quotes in Turkish newspapers where he said, we have Turkey, but our heart is all of Islam. He said this 2016. You can look it up. But look at what some of the things that they're trying to do at this through this Assam movement or conference. Establishment, and so they have these things. Establishment of the legislation of the administrative structure and organs for the Islamic Union. 2017, we did that. 2018, establish of economic cooperation procedures and principles for the Islamic Union. Then the next one will be establishment of defense industry cooperation procedures and principles. Then common defense system procedures and principles. Common foreign policy procedures and principles, 2021. So listen, they have a plan to unite Islam. And they also, they want to do this. Here's I actually have the exact quote from Erdogan in 2016, or the English translation of his Turkish quote. For our physical borders are different from the borders of our heart. Our brothers in Mosul, Kirkuk, and Iraq, in Al-Hasaka, Aleppo, Homs, Misrata, and Libya, in the Republic of Macedonia, Crimea, and the Caucasus, might be outside our physical borders, but they are all inside the borders of our heart. They are right inside our heart. You got to watch this Erdogan guy. What he does is pretty significant. They established a constitution. This constitution determines the existence and the unity of Islamic countries in line with the understanding of the Ummah, which determined by the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. And they actually came out, they've divided the Islamic world into 9 regions. And here they are: Middle East, Middle Asia, Near East, Southeast Asia, North Africa, East Africa, Northwest Africa, Southwest Africa, and European. And they've assigned all of the 61 countries to these different 9 regions that they developed. This is what they're trying to get Islamic unity. So they include the Shia countries like Iran in there, and they also include a country that's not even a country. Palestine is included as one of the 61 countries. In a speech that was given by the Turkish, at this conference, there's no sound on this, by the way, Turkish Deputy Finance Minister Nurettin Nebati suggested that in his address to the conference that Erdogan, to whom he referred as, quote, the leading imam to the Ummah, the Islamic nation, would preside over this planned Islamic confederation. Is there anyone whose power, he said, would be enough to defeat the one who relies on Allah? He asked rhetorically. Now, listen, this stuff never makes it into the mainstream press. You got to really dig to find out what's going on, but I'm grateful for the internet. At another conference in Istanbul, Al-Qadari, the Egyptian theologian, Yusuf Al-Qadari, chairman of the Muslim Brotherhood-linked International Union of Muslim Scholars, known for his advocacy of suicide bombings, expressed similar sentiments at the IUMS General Assembly in Istanbul last month. Turkey is facing plots by those who don't like to see this nation rising and by the West. They would have succeeded in their plots for Allah's support for President Erdogan and his brothers. Allah will help Erdogan to emerge victorious as long as true Muslims are standing by him. And if you remember back when the Muslim Brotherhood was coming to power in Egypt, I think I even talked about this. This is like 5-6 years ago. I think I wrote an article about it. I don't know, I can't find it anymore, but it was about how the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was looking as to Erdogan to see how he had taken over and brought Islam back to the heart and core of Turkey, which had been secular for decades, and how he had done it and how they thought they could do it in a very short period of time. And Erdogan actually went to Cairo and met with the people in the Muslim Brotherhood, who eventually took over and ruled Egypt for a year or two before they were overthrown. And even in some of the intelligence assessments that I've seen, I think it's called ISS, Israel Institute for Security Studies. I think it's under the direction of Martin Sherman. They put out an intelligence assessment, and they even said one of the black swan events that could happen in the Middle East and really change everything geopolitically. Now, they said black swan event isn't likely to happen, but we can't say that it won't happen. What happens if al-Sisi gets overthrown? Now, their assessment is that if a Sisi gets overthrown and he just sort of put himself in place to rule through at least 2034, by the way, I think Erdogan's having a birthday here pretty soon too. He's the same age as I am, by the way, and he's like 1 or 2 days or a week or something younger than I am. And I'm not about ruling the Middle East or the Ottoman Empire or anything like that. So he's much more ambitious than I am. But al-Sisi, if he's overthrown in Egypt, the fear is that Turkey's going to be in there lickety-split to rule Egypt. Now, I think this has prophetic implications. This Islam thing is not to be ignored. Alan, and I don't know how you say his name, Destexa, he's a parliamentarian in the EU. He has looked at what's happened in Belgium. And so he's written this book, Immigration and Integration. And essentially he says, how are we going to stop it? And he looks at Belgium and he says, Belgium is the thing that makes Brussels European is that they have like 39,000 bureaucrats working for the EU in Brussels. You take that away, and it's essentially an Islamic city. And the numbers are shocking as to what's going to happen. Here's what the back of the book says. Since the year 2000, Belgium has experienced much larger migratory shock than its neighbors. A unique example in Europe, it has naturalized nearly 1 million people without seeking to verify their economic or cultural integration. Without public debate, the physiognomy of cities has changed, and they have become impoverished. 70% of social beneficiaries and 90% in Brussels are people of foreign origin who have become the majority in the country's capital. Brussels also has become a European capital of Muslim fundamentalism. Belgium is the country that has seen the most of its youth join the jihad in Syria. In some schools in Brussels, children are now Ramadan at the age of 8 years. Integration failed. Despite the news, there is no study in Belgium that presents a global vision of the twin issues of immigration and integration. In this book, he tries to meet this challenge and successfully discuss the truth of figures and what's exactly going on and the rise of Islam in Belgium. He concludes his book by proposing a government statement to be implemented after the 2019 elections. Good luck with that. We even have it in our country. I think her name is Monica Witt or something. She worked for the Air Force. She was in intelligence in 2013, and it was never reported by the Obama administration. She defected to Iran. Now, when you unpack that, and Frank Gaffney on his Secure Freedom Radio podcast went into this in a number of his interviews this week, she was trained at George Washington University. George Washington and Georgetown University have been heavily funded by Islamic countries in their foreign service departments. Why? Because they want to convert people. I believe the number on George Washington University, I may have it flipped with Georgetown, they have received around $380 million from Muslim Islamic sources to fund this department. And so she came through this. She was in the Obama administration. She left, and because she defected, it's estimated that there were 30 or so intelligence assets, people that were giving us information in Iran, that were uncovered and probably imprisoned, most likely killed. It's also believed that, I've reported on this too, that there was a breach about our intelligence assets in China. And it's now believed that this came about because of the sharing of information between China and Iran, and dozens of assets, 30 to 100 people in China were arrested, imprisoned, and most likely executed. And it's really set us back on intelligence gathering. I want to go back a little bit just now, briefly, to the Munich Security Conference. Jared Kushner was front and center at the conference. He did have some private sessions with the attendees at the conference to discuss his Mideast peace plan. Now, he didn't really give any specifics, but this is a report in the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Netanyahu congratulated Mr. Kushner in response to the presentation he made about his peace plan and for being, quote, crazy enough to come up with ideas. The normalization of relations with the Arab world would help, Mr. Netanyahu continued, adding, I am happy to say there is progress on that. There were people that spoke, and I'm going to show you some of the video of some of the things that were talked about at this conference. The first person that's speaking is the here's what a Middle East peace negotiator said. Aaron David Miller said the increasingly open convening of Israeli and Arab officials in the same room in Warsaw made more clear a regional transformation that has been underway. Look, the Prime Minister of Israel had dinner in a private session with a number of Arab foreign ministers. He met with the Omani foreign minister. He has also seen him in Oman. My takeaway from this, Aaron David Miller says, what is so stunning, so preternaturally amazing is that at the time when there is no peace process and no prospect of one, and there is one of the most right-wing governments in Israeli history, and the Trump administration is waging a political and economic war against the Palestinians, Israel's stock in the region and in the international community is higher now than at any point since the State of Israel was created. He attributed the change to a combination of regional exhaustion, fatigue with the Palestinian issue, and jihadi and Iranian threat. Now, I think that that's true. The jihadi and Iranian threat has sort of led, look, they want Israel to come in and help them. To me, he said, what is so stunning about Warsaw is what it says about the change in regional dynamics. What it doesn't show, in my judgment, is that the Arabs are now inclined to forget about the Palestinian issue. And to which I would say, is this a surprise? How did people react to Obama? He was a weak president. He was a pushover. But Trump is not, Netanyahu is not, and I think that engenders some respect from these countries because they know what they have to deal with, and they'll adjust accordingly. Now, I don't know that I trust them. So here's just a couple minutes of the Bahrain foreign minister talking about Israel and the Iranian issue. Now, this was, the audio is not great, but listen closely. He's talking about Israel and Iran and what's now becoming important in the Middle East. Now, Bahrain is ruled by a Sunni government, but the people are mostly Shia. It's in the area of the oil-rich area of Saudi Arabia, which is, while it's ruled by Sunni Saudi family, it's Shia. So Iran's trying to cause problems there. So listen to what he says. This is his perspective. This is kind of stunning. Now, this was secretly filmed and put up on the Israeli Prime Minister's YouTube channel and then taken down, but some people captured it.
We were talking about the Palestine-Israel dispute as the most important issue that we have to see either solved or we're not. But then, at the later stage, we saw a bigger challenge. We saw a more toxic one. In fact, the most toxic in our modern history, which came from the Islam. From Iran.
Well, that's not coming through very clearly. So let me just stop it. And I'm going to go to the next one here, and this is the Saudi foreign minister talking. I'll see if this one's a little bit better. So let me back up. So here's the Saudi it used to be the Saudi foreign minister.
JCPOA was signed, and everybody thought, okay, now everything is fine. Iran in 10 years is going to turn into Wonderland, and let's ignore the other stuff. Meanwhile, we in the region bear the brunt of all the other stuff that Iran is doing, and for us, 10 years is a big blink of an eye.
Well,
the kingdoms.
Let me just say what he said. If you want to read about what they said, because it's pretty important, and actually watch the video, go to timesofisrael.com and look up the Prime Minister Netanyahu video removed. I think that's a search where I found it. And they say some pretty stunning things there. They say, look, he resigned in December as the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia. He's now has some title about Minister of State of Foreign Affairs. He just said, listen, Iran is everywhere. They're messing around in everything. Everywhere you look, they're causing problems. And if Iran wants to be brought into the region and have a hand of peace extended, they need to stop lying and they need to stop engaging in all of these activities. And they essentially acknowledge, listen, we don't have this problem with Israel. We have this problem with Iran. And something needs to be done about it. And they're afraid that Iran's going to get nuclear missiles. The Bahrain foreign minister and the one from the United Arab Emirates who was there also said essentially the same thing. We've got to do something about what Iran is doing. And the suggestion was, look, while we'd like to get the Palestinian issue solved, the Iran problem is more of a problem. Iran's in Syria, and they asked the panel. Dennis Ross, who's been a Middle East negotiator and peace advocate for a long time on behalf of the United States, said, what do we do? I mean, what do you think needs to be done? And they all said we need to stop Iran. Can Israel defend itself, he asked, and the United Arab Emirates foreign minister representative said, hey, look, you could see he was put on the spot. The Saudi and Bahrain guys didn't really want to answer the question. So the UAE guy answered, and he said, listen, they're a country, they're a right to defend themselves. This is pretty stunning stuff. Now, I don't think Saudi Arabia was too happy about that. So they sent out Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud, who was at one time the U.S. ambassador, and he gave an interview to an Israeli television channel. This is pretty unusual. Now, he focused on something else. Here's what he had to say in that interview about the Palestinian issue.
The kingdom's outlook on peace in the Middle East definitely takes into account what Israel says and Israel does. So I would go as far as 2002. The late King Abdullah, when he was crown prince, presented his peace plan. Basically, it's a quid pro quo. The kingdom's outlook on peace in the Middle East definitely takes into account what Israel says and Israel does. So I would go as far as 2002. The late King Abdullah, when he was crown prince.
Excuse me 1 second. I have the wrong video in here, so I'm going to call an audio, and I'm going to insert. I don't think I have the right video. I'm going to try it. So let me delete this one. Excuse me for this. They're back there yelling that I didn't say audible correctly. It's like my wife is always saying, you didn't say that word correctly. And I'm like, did you know what I was talking about? You knew what I was talking about, right? The purpose of language is to communicate information, and so you knew what I was, so, get off of the mispronunciation thing. So let me... Yeah, you know what, when I say nuclear or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. So here we go. Let's see if this one's different.
There's a sense that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is more open to warming up relations with Israel than other Saudi leaders in the past. Is this true?
Not as far as I can see. He is a stalwart representative of Saudi policy. And I think that is more wishful thinking on the part of Israeli officials, if you like.
But there's a sense that the Crown Prince tried to go on a sort of a different policy on Israel-Palestine, and that King Salman basically gave him a red light and brought back Saudi Arabia to a more traditional policy.
That's for you to interpret. For me, I see Prince Mohammed's consistency in the fact that he supports the Palestinian cause to the fullest. There is no difference between Prince Mohammed and King Salman on any issue, and he does what the king tells him.
So you think that the Israeli government is not telling the truth when it says that it's warming relations with Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, even though there's still stalemate with the Palestinians?
Israeli public opinion should not be deceived into believing that the Palestinian issue is a dead issue. I think from the Israeli point of view, Mr. Netanyahu would like us to have a relationship and then we can fix the Palestinian issue. From the Saudi point of view, it's the other way around.
Now, so here's what I think happened. Netanyahu put up this video from Warsaw of what the Saudi foreign minister or former foreign minister was saying, Bahrain, UAE, and he was making some statements about the peace process and that type of thing, that the Palestinians were essentially being abandoned. And the Saudis said, okay, we got to get out ahead of this. So they sent this former U.S. ambassador, Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud, to London. And he gave this interview to Israel Channel 13 to say, maybe it's not quite that way. But look, I think in the background, what's really going on is Saudi Arabia is concerned about Iran. But they just can't let go of the Palestinian issue for public relations purposes. So it's again, this is part of the thing is you got to kind of read between the lines of what's going on. So I wouldn't take what Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud said in this interview as gospel, because the facts on the ground are a little bit different. And the foreign ministers, when they're speaking off the record at Warsaw, seem to be supporting what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. So we'll see how this plays out. The Munich Security Conference, this is Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign minister. This was some of her opening comments at the Munich Security Conference, which followed the Warsaw Security Conference.
The Munich Security Report that was presented ahead of this conference says we are living in, and also our global strategy says, we're living in complex times. I was surprised to see that the report, the Munich Security Report, uses a famous quote by Antonio Gramsci, saying that the old is dying and the new cannot be born.
And so she says, look, this is complex. Iran Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif came out and said, look, and he gave an interview this week that was to a German newspaper, and it said, listen, we're not saying we're ready to go to war with Israel, but we can't rule out that possibility. I was going to play a clip of him speaking at the Munich Security Conference, but I thought the Iranians are, even the Arabian foreign ministers there said, they're a bunch of two-faced people. You can't really trust what they're saying to your face. Because they say something to your face and then behind you, they're doing something else. So what they do is they send Zarif and Rouhani out here, and they're nice guys, and they speak very nicely at these conferences. But then the Ayatollah Khamenei gets up and he does this speech about how we're going to destroy Israel. Iran's foreign minister Mohammad Zarif accused Israel of engaging in adventurism with its bombing campaigns in Syria, and said he could not rule out the possibility of a military conflict between the countries. Zarif told the German newspaper that Iran was in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government while Israel was violating Lebanese and Syrian airspace. Now, Danny Gantz came out. He's running against Netanyahu for prime minister, and he spoke at the Warsaw conference. No, he spoke at the Munich conference. He spoke at one of the conferences. And this is what he had to say. And I only put this up because there's really no difference between what Netanyahu says and Gantz says on the Iranian issue.
President Rouhani, on my watch, there will be no Chamberlain-Munich agreement. There will be no appeasement. On my watch, Iran will not threaten Israel by taking over Syria, Lebanon, or Gaza Strip. Nor will it undermine pragmatic regimes in the Middle East. On my watch, Iran will not have nuclear weapons. I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the fight against Iran's aggression.
Okay, so there's no difference on that. At the same time, there's a report in the Jerusalem Post this week that NGO, a non-government organization, is working to thwart Israeli annexation of the West Bank. It's an organization called the Committee for Israel Security, CIS. It's made up of about 300 former IDF officers. They've issued a number of reports, ramifications of West Bank annexation. What they are concerned about is that there are people on the political right in Israel that want to annex parts of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and bring them under Israeli control. And so these people are coming out, and I think they're aligned with Gantz and Lapid, who are on the left side of the Israeli political spectrum running in the Knesset elections set for April 9th. And what they're doing is they're trying to paint Netanyahu as a right-wing extremist. And so one of the things Netanyahu came out this week said he was going to support one of the right-wing parties, or he would accept their support, and they just got all over him. Oh, they're racist. It's part of the Kahana movement, or the what remains of the Meir Kahana. They're racist. They're extremists. They're right-wing extremists. Netanyahu this morning tweeted, and he said essentially the AIPAC came out and criticized Netanyahu for doing this. The AJC came out and criticized Netanyahu for doing this. And he said, listen, this is some kind of hypocrisy and double virtue of the left. They condemn a block to the right with rightist parties, while the left-hand act is to put the radical Islamists into the Knesset to produce a block of Islamists. So the left brings Islamists into the Israeli Knesset and supports them. But if somebody supports somebody so what I'm trying to tell you is the political rhetoric in Israel as we approach the April 9th elections is ramping up. It's going to get pretty nasty. Caroline Glick, who's running on the New Right Party, put out by Justice Minister Shaked and Naftali Bennett. Here's just a brief clip of her interview addressing some of the issues of annexation and that type of thing.
Now, look, we have rights. We have sovereign rights to Judea and Samaria. Our sovereign claim under international law to Judea and Samaria are stronger than anybody else's. They emanate directly from the mandate of the League of Nations that, was never annulled or superseded. So there is no other nation with sovereign rights to Judea and Samaria, only the Jewish people, only the state of Israel, and we have to assert those rights, and we have to ensure that they're respected. We haven't done that for a long time, and it's well nigh time that we start. So I think that, first of all, our solution is to ensure the civil rights and the national rights and the strategic interests of the state of Israel, and that's what we have to do. I think that, yes, we have to implement Israeli law as opposed to military law in Area C of Judea and Samaria. And we can continue. The Palestinians have been living in an autonomous self-rule, not under Israeli control, for the past 23 years, since they established the Palestinian Authority and the major Palestinian population centers in Judea and Samaria. They're not under Israeli governance. And so there's no reason for us to deny them continued self-governance. If they have their government, they were supposed to re-elect it, but that's not our problem. They have their passports, they have their identity cards, they have, their self-rule, and why should we take it away from them? So,
just some other things that happened sort of in, I think, prophetic related geopolitics this week. This was a speech that Putin gave this week, his State of the Union address, State of the State address, and he essentially said, look, we're ramping up our weapons. It essentially sounded like rhetoric from the Cold War. We have better weapons than the United States. And look, Russia's not a rich country. Their GDP is about equal to Italy. But they are investing in very good weapon systems. Now, I think some of them are hyped, but you have to be very careful, because what if what they say is true? And it is a game changer. So he's sort of ramping up the rhetoric against the United States. We've got the thing going on in Venezuela, and he's sort of getting into the mix in Venezuela through proxies. So that's something to be, it's something I'm concerned about, because Russia may just say we've had enough, and they have some better weapon systems than we do, and their nuclear arsenal, and they're developing others. And if those start to come online pretty quickly, we have a major problem. This is a report from The Independent yesterday or Friday. China blocks plane tickets over lack of social credit. I mentioned this a few weeks ago, that China's putting into place a social credit score, And if your social credit score is not good enough, you cannot buy high-speed rail tickets or high-speed or airplane tickets to travel. You just can't do it. You're blocked. You're effectively put under regional arrest. And there are now probably over 20 million people in China that fall into this category. At the same time, China is persecuting Muslims and Uyghurs in Western China. Over 1 million are believed to be in detention camps, prison camps, concentration camps, re-education camps. Mohammed bin Salman went to a meeting this week. I don't know if he went to China. I know he was in Pakistan to sort of shore up the Saudi relation with Pakistan. And there's a lot going on, by the way, between Pakistan and India. That is a very volatile situation right now. On that border in Kashmir, where did you know when they created the border in 1948, there were probably 3 million people that died when that border was drawn here instead of here, as people tried to get across the border? The stories, I mean, it's like a Holocaust that happened and nobody ever talks about it. But Mohammed bin Salman met with China this week and said, listen, the Uyghurs are Here's a couple good news things. Israel's spacecraft is on its way to the moon. Only the fourth country to really have a shot at doing this. Anti-Semitism attacks are ramping up. Here was a rally against anti-Semitism in Paris the other night. Macron came out and spoke against it. So this anti-Semitism is rising dramatically. And I'm going to save the rest of this for next week. I'm going to read, though, Seth Frantzman, who's one of the editors at the Jerusalem Post, had a good Facebook post this week. And I just want to read about this because I think this is a prophetic aspect of the end times, is the rise of anti-Semitism. And we see it all over the place. And so he lives in Jerusalem, editor for the Jerusalem Post, one of the editors for the Jerusalem Post, and he said this. Attacks on graveyards, for instance, is there any comparison? Are any other faith group graveyards routinely attacked, ever? There are other religious groups wherein 100 years there are less attacks on their graves than in just 1 year of attacks on Jewish graves in a place like France. Again, the incidence might be 100 to 1. It's like if Amish people in the U.S. were routinely victims of attacks. Physically, their churches targeted and graves desecrated. But that doesn't happen. It happens infrequently, if at all. So the real question is, when it comes to anti-Semitic racism, why is there any? Why do so many people follow into this, he asks. He says, we've been conditioned to accept that there is rising anti-Semitism when there should be zero anti-Semitic racism. Not some, zero. There are about 4 times the number of Jews in the world as there are Jains. That's a religious group in, I think, Sri Lanka. And yet, you don't see people attacking Jain cemeteries, or the leader of Malaysia is spreading conspiracies about Jains, because nobody would even think of such a thing. So when we hear about these European countries with their anti-Semitic racism, it is a widespread indictment of these places. There should be zero racism against Jews, zero attacks on cemeteries, zero groups online of people denying the Shoah, the Holocaust, zero famous authors spreading conspiracy theories, zeros. That is the only goalpost to measure anti-Semitism from. Why is there any? In countries with 50,000 members of one minority out of 50 million, why are there attacks on the cemeteries of the 50,000? Why does the place of worship of the 50,000 need armed guards? Why? Why can't they be left alone like Jains or Baha'i or some other small religion? Ask that. I think it's a great thought. And there was a great article, I'll just reference the title this week, a great thoughtful blog post by Melanie Phillips, and it was titled, "While Hoaxes Make Headlines, Real Attacks on Jews Keep Happening." You might look that up at melaniephillips.com. Here's what she concludes. Hoax politics is an example of cultural totalitarianism that fries the brain and creates a climate of political, intellectual, and moral chaos. Is that happening? Every week I bring you example after example of this. It's why so many of us feel that the world has spun off its axis altogether. And it's why the whole anti-Israel and anti-Jew pathology that has erupted in the West is part of a broader and devastating cultural nervous breakdown. It's the truth wars. It really is. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the gospel, the gift of your Son who shed his blood on the cross for our sins, that we can accept that free gift of salvation through belief in what he did, that he rose again, that he was buried, rose again, and will return as the triumphant ruling king. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.